Hello and good evening, everybody. How is everybody doing? There's been all kinds of news coming out pertaining to the LA fires. Last week, I was on the road at the end of the week, going up and down the country, speaking at schools. And then it was just back to back podcasts. So I've not had a chance to do my news update, but here I am. And we have got Jay-Z, Diddy, LA fires, Luigi, news. And when it comes to the LA fire news, I've got a insider perspective because there was a guy called Leonard Gregg who I was housed with in the maximum security Madison Street jail. And Leonard, they had set fire, the largest fire in the history of Arizona at the time. Thousands of people had to be evacuated. But what he told me and what the news told me, completely different things. We're going to get to that. Let's start out with some traditional Diddy Jay-Z news, shall we? And cheers for everybody who's in the chat. And I was on. Yeah, the DJ who's coming on tomorrow is a former friend from Arizona who moved to Hollywood. And he saw a lot. He saw Diddy in the mix and lots of other huge names in the mix in the gay bars he was DJing at. We're going to get to, he's coming on tomorrow. And of course, we had Gemma on last night, Grooming Gang Survivor. If you missed that one, whoo, her parts 1 and 2 are mind-blowing. All right, so we've got Jay-Z's lawyer highlights glaring red flags in our word accuser's story as tensions rise in fiery war of words. And as we know, the club is protecting Jay-Z. Busby is the tip of the spear, pricking the club right now, threatening the value of all these billions of contracts and the NFL deals and everything else. Busby's going through hell because of it. And they are relentless. Spiro has filed a 30-page motion claiming to unravel inconsistencies in Jane Doe's story and demanding that measures are taken against Busby for causing extraordinary harm to Jay-Z. But Busby fired back, saying that Spiro's filing reeks of desperation and is full of lies. Spiro and his firm are paid by the hour, he said. So they file a lot of junk with the court. Oh, those high-priced lawyers love to create work for themselves. I've seen it. The war of words has been waging for weeks. The woman, Jane Doe, is now a 38-year-old mother of 2. Claimed the essay happened at her home when she was taken after the VMAs in September 2000. We've covered that one quite a lot. But Diddy came in, who was ready to party, and then he and Jay forced themselves upon her. But Spiro is highlighting the many mistakes in identifying who was at the party, even if she stood by her story. And we've done a whole analysis that it was probably the wrong year. Tisa Tells has done a few videos on this. I think it's some of her best work. Shout out to Tisa. And Spiro has just been pointing out that the claims are demonstrably false and there are glaring red flags. And that the residence, the gated U-shaped driveway one, it couldn't have happened because Diddy was at the Lotus nightclub in New York with J-Lo. And on it goes. And I'm not going to rehash all the inconsistencies that are in front of me right now because we've already done it and we've already looked at the rebuttals. All right. So, how many of you guys have seen my documentary on Max, HBO Max in America, Sons of Ecstasy. If you've seen it, put a 1 in the chat. I'm just curious. If you've not seen it, if you are not in America and you are wondering how to see it, use a VPN. And there's a link to a VPN that helps the channel in the chat. Loads of ones coming in. Not yet. Gonna watch it soon. What did you guys think of it? I thought it was very fast-paced and very well put together. A lot of people were confused about my Sammy the Bull story. We had Sammy on the channel a couple of days ago, and I was on his channel a couple of days ago. There's 2 parts to it. And Sammy apologized to me for getting duped by the trolls into saying stuff that added to the nonsense when people were trying to say that I was hiding my true charges. I really had Diddy charges, and I'd made up the Sammy the Bull story. But now it's out there on Max. All these people look like fools. They wouldn't listen. They weren't interested in the truth. And we went over to that in more detail last night on Jaguar Wright's channel. How many of you saw me on Jaguar Wright's channel last night? Put a 2 in the chat if you did. And if you didn't, I am going to make sure. Yeah, I'm going to put the link in the description box. And I'm also going to put the link in the live chat. Because I was on a long live stream, but see lots of 2s. Thank you. And Jag's channel is uncensored. And I was over there with Ziggy. All right. If you didn't see it, I put it in the chat. And if you're watching the replay of this, the link is at the top of the description box. Below that is the NordVPN link. If you've not seen Sons of Ecstasy and you are overseas, you need a VPN to watch it. And Nord is helping us sponsor our podcast costs. So, all right. I said I was going to go over to the fires. Let's get some video footage of the fires up. And I will tell you the story of Leonard Gregg while we get the fires raging behind me. 1 second. I can't access it with a subscription. Oh, yeah, you do have to have a subscription as well to Max, don't you? But you can just get a subscription and then cancel it after you watch it. That's one way to do it. California wildfires. Share screen. Make it big. All right. There we go. That's what's going on, folks. I do have VPN subscription, can't access it. So you've got to tell your VPN that you're in America and then go to Max and you've got to sign up for Max. Yeah. All right. So there's the fires. Absolutely horrific. You know, this is the biggest one. There's always fires in California, and there's some in Arizona as well to a lesser extent. So when I was in Arizona from 91 to, what was it, 2017? No, 2007, 91, 2000, 16 years. Then I would always see on the headline news the fires in California. Anyway, I was housed in the same building in the maximum security Madison Street jail as Leonard Gregg. And here's a BBC story from 2002. Firefighter charged over Arizona blaze. A man was arrested in Arizona for allegedly starting one of the 2 forest fires that eventually merged into a massive blaze that has forced thousands to flee their homes. Leonard Gregg, 29, is a contract firefighter for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, who allegedly started the blaze because he wanted some seasonal work prosecutors said. Appearing in court in Flagstaff, Arizona, Mr. Gregg was charged with 2 counts of willfully and without authority setting fire to timber, said U.S. District Magistrate Stephen Verkamp. Each charge carries a possible jail sentence of 5 years and a fine of up to $250,000. Mr. Gregg is accused of starting what was originally called the Rodeo Fire, which merged with another blaze to form the biggest fire in Arizona history. By Saturday, it ripped through 180,000 hectares, 452,000 acres, destroying more than 400 homes and forcing more than 30,000 people to flee. The announcement of the arrest was made in Show Low, a small town that firefighters were able to spur from the flames as the residents returned to their homes, but the blaze was still burning out of control. The fire crews were working hard to save the community of Forest Lakes, 55 km from Show Low. We're still dealing with a huge monster, fire crew spokesman Jim Paxson said. The latest battleground in a local highway, State Route 260. Fire officials fear that if the blaze is able to jump the road, it will expand rapidly through a pine forest. President George Bush visited the region last week before heading to Canada for the G8 summit and declared a major disaster in the area, freeing up federal recovery funds. Other fires in the US all continue to burn, Colorado, etc. All right, anyway, you get the picture. The media said that Leonard Gregg had started the biggest fire in the history of Arizona because he was a firefighter and he wanted to create work for himself. Sounds a bit like these lawyers, doesn't it? Creating work for themselves. Now, I spoke to Leonard Gregg in the maximum security Madison Street jail around 2003, 2004. And Leonard Gregg was a survivor of fetal alcohol syndrome. It's one of the first times I'd heard about it. I read his paperwork, and his mum drank and abused her body, and that affected his ability to think properly. And basically, Leonard Gregg was so slow, he didn't know what the hell was going on with his case. And that's why he asked me to read his paperwork. And when I read his paperwork and I looked at the news headlines saying he'd done all this to create work for himself, something was not adding up. So the mainstream media to this day have stuck to this narrative that Leonard Gregg started this fire, when I know for a fact they scared the living daylights out of him, told him he was never going to get out of prison unless he signed for guilt, and he would do about a 10-year sentence to take the wrath of the public. Now, why would they manipulate a mentally ill man, slow in the brain, a survivor of fetal alcohol syndrome, into guilt? Telling him, sign here, we'll only give you 10 years, admit guilt, go to trial and lose, you will never get out. And poor Leonard Gregg was terrified he would never get out, and so he did what his public pretender told him to do. So his public pretender could move on to his or her next victim, because they have a case quota and they get paid by the amount of cases they close. So what I'm saying, folks, is when factors come into play and circumstances are created or enabled by politicians, such as the grooming gangs in the UK, who I learnt last night from Gemma, have 200,000 victims. Well, all these bloody politicians were so woke and scared to do anything about it because all they cared about was the way they were perceived in certain communities. Hundreds of thousands of British teenagers got R-worded and SA'd by grooming gangs. If you've missed Gemma's part 2 last night, she is so emotional. It's just heartbreaking. And I would start with Gemma's part 1. It's called Grooming Gang Horror Story. She gets into the details. It's graphic content warning, but she's one of the most powerful, charismatic, emotional speakers we have ever had on this channel. She's an absolute spiritual warrior. So, what these phony politicians do to lay the frameworks for natural disasters to be exacerbated or for grooming gang members not to be incarcerated, the mainstream media goes along with these phonies and reports whatever garbage they want us to hear. And when that fire was raging in Arizona, and poor old Leonard Gregg was my neighbor, and he was crying because he thought he was never going out of prison. He didn't even know what he'd done wrong. He was just slow of the brain, fetal alcohol syndrome. And all the headlines were saying he was this wicked man who had lit this fire. So all the public hatred poured down upon Leonard Gregg, this evil firefighter creating work for himself, when really there were insidious characters behind the scenes manipulating this mainstream media narrative so that blame would not be redirected in other directions. And with the California fires right now that we are seeing, blame started to rain down upon the lady in charge of the fire budget for her budget cuts and for sending water to save the fishies. Blame has been raining down upon the Kardashians. Put in, if you look, where is it? Kardashians. Water hoarders. Kardashians have been known as the worst water